What's up, everybody? Welcome back in another edition of the First and Orange podcast. Parker Gabriel here, Ryan McFadden there, Denver Post Broncos beat reporters coming to you. It's January 10th. The season is over, and yet it's like all the exciting, crazy, interesting, curious stuff is all still ahead, Ryan. It's going to be one of those, it's setting up, and we'll obviously get into all the reasons why. A ton to talk about, but it's setting up to be one of those off seasons around here.
Oh yeah, most definitely. When you make a move to bench a 9-time Pro Bowler Russell Wilson, you are at that moment you knew that the real season begins in
Yeah.
in the off season, just to figure out what's going to happen at that quarterback's position. Honestly, I still feel like there's still more questions to be answered in regards to how to that situation in general. We heard some yesterday from George and Sean. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, and it's not only just a quarterback. There's a lot when you go watch this season, and even whoever goes back and watch some of these games. There's a lot of things that the Broncos need to fix, and the biggest question is how they're going to do it, especially with the limited draft capital and cap space.
Yeah, no doubt. It's like they have a really long shopping list or a really long needs list, and not a ton of ammunition at present to go work with. And so it's going to be fascinating. Let's start sort of high level, as you mentioned, Ryan. Yesterday, we heard from Sean Payton, George Paton, and Greg Penner, obviously the team's CEO, sort of like season wrap up news conference. Obviously, Russell Wilson, that situation really, I would say, dominated, or at least was at the forefront of, our conversations with George Paton and with Greg Penner. Sean got a little bit less of the Russell stuff yesterday, in part because he's talked about it. He didn't say much about it, but he's been asked about it over the last couple of weeks of the regular season since making the decision to bench him. So that's one. Obviously, the sort of like ongoing Russell Wilson situation is one. And then the other is just simply the fact, I don't think this is a big surprise at this point, but, George Paton was there. He talked, and he and Sean Payton both talked about that they think they have a good relationship working together. And Greg Penner, most importantly, George's boss, said he thinks, George Payton's going to help them build winning football teams, and that he likes the partnership of Sean and George. So essentially, a vote of confidence from the boss for George Paton in terms of his job security. It's always, I'm just saying this. It's not rooted in anything or anything like that. But like, some teams make general manager decisions right after a season. Some teams make general manager decisions after a draft. And so like, I don't think we're sitting here saying like, oh, no matter what, it's going to be like Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis where they work together for years and years and years necessarily. But there were questions, especially, with the Russell Wilson situation being the latest, sort of saga for the Broncos. And they made it pretty clear that they see George Paton, being part of the future in Denver. So two biggest takeaways there, Ryan. Let's start maybe with the Russell Wilson stuff. And I guess, we've been over the he said, they said about the negotiations in October. We can get into that if you want. I'm curious too, though, what you made of the way that the three of them yesterday talked about the door being open and just sort of the situation going forward with Russell Wilson.
To me, I think the whole situation is still like you said, that he said, that it's that back and forth,
Yep.
and we still to me, I think there's still somewhere in the middle where there's more to be answered. But yeah, it's still that back and forth. I know, like George and Sean said, the door's still open. To me, I don't think the door is open. I think that's it. I think that's hard to like. You go to your starting quarterback, a 9-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, who's made two Super Bowls, a Super Bowl champion, and made 2 Super Bowl appearances. So this is a well-respected guy in the NFL.
Yep.
And you go to him after beating the Chiefs, snapping a 16-game losing streak to your divisional foe, and say, "Hey, if you don't rework your contract, we might decide to sit you." I think that's hard, and just given from the vibe from even when Russell Wilson spoke to us a couple of weeks ago, that's what I got from him too. I know he even said it, but like I was like, that's Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's always that guy that always thinking positive, and has the best interest of whoever he's playing for. But to me, they say the door's open. It's hard for me to see it. I think this might be the end for Russell Wilson's time in Denver. And did I expect it to end this way? No. I've said, to me, the best case scenario with the Russell Wilson situation was you can get 2 years of rest,
Yep.
at least 2 seasons of them, and you either draft someone, whether it's in this draft or maybe in 2025, and you have that guy work under Russ, let him develop, and then then you're able to go to Russ and say, hey, we got this young guy we really wanted to, we want to see. And there you have it. But I think that didn't happen. And I think it's, like I said, it's hard to go back. It's different if, let's say, Russell Wilson was the 2022 version of Russ,
Right.
where I think he has like 16 touchdowns, 15 interceptions like that. I might be off, but you're talking about a guy that threw for over 3,000 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He helped you. He was a part of helping you guys go on a 5-game win streak to get into the playoff hunt. And then you decide to say, hey, we need another spark on offense. And I think it's worse when you do make the change, we still see the same offensive output coming from Denver. So no, yeah, Sean said the door's open. I don't think so. I think this is it. It's just, for me, and honestly, like, you got to think about, does Russ want to even come back? Like, after how they treated you, do you want to come back from it? I don't see it. I think it's hard. I'll be shocked. Now, I could be proven wrong, but I'll be shocked for someone to want to come back after how that played out.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, like, there's so many levels to this. Like, obviously the emotion of this sort of like saga, right? And the negotiations and the, negotiations that the Broncos call it threats, what Russell Wilson, his people call it, whatever it was, the talk about, hey, listen, we're not comfortable with this, $37 million becoming guaranteed in March. If you get hurt against Buffalo or any game in the second half of the season, like, we're going to be on the hook for that. And we just, that doesn't work for us. So you have the emotional side of how all of that played out. And then you also, like, I think the thing is, Ryan, like, if you want to take Sean Payton 100% absolutely at his word that it was a football decision to bench Russ for the final 2 games and play Jarrett Stidham, and you actually, and just in your heart of hearts, you 100% believe that gave you the best chance of winning the last 2 games, like, that also signals that it's over. Like, that's not, well, if it's a football decision, then maybe he'll be back. No, you thought that Jarrett Stidham, who has 2 starts in his life, 4 years in the NFL, gave you a better chance of winning against 2 bad teams than a guy who's played, 12 years in the NFL. Like, the writing's on the wall in that situation too. And so, like, I just don't, like, first of all, like, yeah, okay, the door's open. I don't think there's anybody that expects that Russell will be back with the Broncos next year. But the other part of that is just, like, I think Sean Payton made it pretty clear when he talked about, just the way that the offense was underwhelming over the course of the year and all of those things, without ever saying, Russell can't run my offense. There was a lot of that subtext. There's a lot of stuff that goes in that general direction, even if it's not quite that blatant. He talked about they struggled in the red zone and in the low red zone with Jarrett Stidham too. But when he talked about that at the point when he made the change, he said, we have 15 games of data and patterns and all of this, and, like, this has continued to be an issue for us. Like, it's pretty clear that, like, Russell Wilson's part of that issue. And so all of this, like, all of it just lines up to, at some point over the next 2 months, that either they'll release him, which seems like the most, likely outcome, or maybe there's a trade that gets worked out. I don't quite know how that works or why a team that knows he's going to get released would trade for him unless there's several teams vying for it. And at that point, like, maybe Russell and his agent Mark Rodgers and George Payton and Richard Otto, who handles the cap for the Broncos, like, maybe they could all sit down and work out a deal to sort of like restructure the contract to make it, viable for another team to bring on. But like, I just don't. It's not that that's impossible. It's just I haven't thought of the situation yet where like that makes more sense for Russell than just getting released and then being free to sign with whoever he wants on a fresh contract. So like that seems to be where it's headed. I thought it was interesting, Ryan, that all three really, but George Payton and Greg Penner, who are the two, that we don't hear from as often as we hear from Sean, obviously, during the season. I thought it was interesting. Both of them made it very clear that George Payton called it extreme, the dead cap that they would take on if they cut Russell Wilson. But both of those guys made it pretty abundantly clear that they've thought about this, that they've planned for it, and that even though it's obviously would be a major financial, constraint and unprecedented in terms of dead money in NFL history, that they've thought through it and that they've planned and budgeted for a reality where they're dealing with that for the next, 2 years probably.
Yeah. And one thing I think is the funniest thing about this whole situation, about the whole Russ situation, to me, if they would have just waited, like, let Russ play the Chargers game.
Right.
Because the Chiefs, Steelers won, boom, you're knocked out the playoffs. So if you would have let Russ play that Chargers game, win or not,
right,
and you're already knocked out, and Sean Payton comes out and say, we're making a quarterback change, Jarrett Stidham starting the finale. I don't think no one will look at the decision, and it won't face the criticism that has been faced for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I that's the one thing I look at it like. I felt like the team jumped the gun a little bit because I think it was just bad timing overall. If you wanted to move on from the guy, if you didn't, whether it's performance based, financial based, whatever, I felt like if you want to just avoid all the distractions, avoid all the criticism, just let Russ play that Chargers game. If he would have got knocked out, boom, cool. Then you can go on and say, we're just going to start him. And then it looks like you're just you're trying to avoid your starting quarterback from getting injured in a meaningless game against the Raiders. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Obviously, this is going to I would assume when George approached them, they had some type of plan financially. If Russ said no, I'm not going to rework my contract for you guys, especially if you said, hey, if you're going to bench me if I do. But yeah, it's just, to me, it's just been I think it's just been a complete mess overall. How it's been handled, and to me, it's like I look at it like this: like this is the business. It's the business of the NFL. I get that, and are we surprised that they asked them to do that? No, I think most people probably expected that was going to happen. But yeah, it's just the way it's been portrayed from what Russ said. Sean Payton saying like, I don't know what's going on upstairs. I just focus on football. It's just like all that's just been a complete mess. And to me, like I said to start it, I think it's best for Russ to. I think it's over. And even for Russ, if the door is open, like they said, if they said the door is open and that's what they believe, if I'm Russ, I'm doing whatever it takes just to move on. Yeah, I think that it's just too much. And if you're going to do that to, like, if I'm in Russ situation, you're going to do that to me on this year, especially when I'm playing very well and help get this team in the postseason. You do that. Like, what do I expect for next year? So yeah, if I'm Russ, like, even if they say the door is open for me to come back, I'm just going to like, hey, let's just get me out of here.
Yeah, and the easiest way for Russ to, expedite that happening is just to not play ball on, restructuring his deal from here or whatever, because they're just not going to guarantee the $37 million on March 17th. So, that's the way this all lines up. Is they'll probably release them, and then the dead cap's $85 million, probably most likely split over 2 years instead of trying to, swallow all of that at once. That would basically require, maxing out your credit card and blowing up the roster, which seems not advisable. Probably it would be interesting, but I don't think that's going to happen. So most likely $35.4 million on the cap for 2024, $49.6 million on the cap for 2025. to have a guy not be on your roster. So it's never happened like that in the NFL before. Matt Ryan's the biggest, I think, single dead cap number in history was 40 million. Aaron Rodgers is counting similar against Green Bay's cap this year. And so, that like the 35.4 million in 2024, that in and of itself is an unprecedented. Teams do deal with that kind of number. It's just that they'd be dealing with that, 2 years in a row, which is the part that's never, no team in NFL history has done that before. So that sort of sets up the next part of it, which is that, we got the pretty strong support from Greg Penner for George Payton, the general manager. And obviously George, like, it becomes a hot button issue with Broncos fans, and it's perfectly understandable why, because some of the biggest moves that George Payton has made as the Broncos general manager, since he was hired in January of 21 have failed spectacularly. Obviously, the Russell Wilson trade and subsequent extension, signing Randy Gregory, hiring Nathaniel Hackett. Like these are the points that everybody goes to, and it's fair. Like it's a performance business. I don't think all that counts for nothing, obviously. But I also think that, Sean Payton decided pretty early on that he and George work together well. And I think I think, look, the Russell thing, it's a failure no matter how you spin it. I mean, and it's not, I don't say that to be like, you're not trying to be a jerk or anything. Like everybody wanted it to work with Russell and it just didn't for whatever myriad reasons. But I think at some point the pressure was going to be on George to take a big swing at quarterback, and he did. And so like there weren't a lot of people at the time saying this is a terrible idea, maybe in Seattle, but not nationally. And that doesn't, like, you don't just get a pass for that. It's the NFL. Like you don't just get to say like, oh, well, nobody thought it was a bad idea at the time, so okay, no accountability. It's not that. It's just that, like, I think you can respect taking the swing, and it went bad. So to me, like, I think Greg Penner and Sean Payton both think that this, this group, this sort of trio, can work, and that George can be a big part of that going forward. And as long as that's the case, then I think they'll roll with it. So it's going to be interesting to see, how it shakes out. And it's going to be very interesting to see, with the full off season, an extra month basically of George and Sean working together, sort of where they, chart the course for this roster, because they have a bunch of decisions to make with veteran players. And then obviously they have the number 12 overall pick in April's draft, but they only have 6 picks. So I don't know. There's all sorts of interesting decisions ahead. Ryan, what did you make of the sort of like George Payton, part of the conversation yesterday?
Yeah, I feel like you hit on all the points. It's clear that Greg believes in this tandem to work, despite when you look at George Payton's, like when you look at, like, let's say the Randy Gregory deal, the trade for Russell Wilson, and like you said, that extension. Yeah, those are all bad moves. But I think when you look at Greg, I think their idea is like, all right, we haven't seen. Let's see what he can do with Sean Payton,
right?
In the building as well. So I'm not ready to jump off. I'm not the guy that's ready to, like some fans are ready to throw George off the bus and get him out of Denver. I like to see how this offseason works. I think it's going to be a very interesting offseason. One, you do get that first round pick. Their first is 2021. Obviously, like George said, that one did turn out pretty well. It will be interesting what they would do with that 12th overall pick, whether they trade down, whether they try to figure out a way to sneak up. Do they get a quarterback or do they not? Then you also got to look at the rest of the roster. There's a lot of things they're going to need in terms of, help up front on the defensive side. You're going to, at some point, you're going to have to address the offensive tackle depth. There's guys currently on the roster you're going to have to address in terms of their contracts as well. It's good. Like, I think it's going to be interesting offseason, all with the reminder that they don't have a lot to work with in terms of draft and salary cap. So yeah, I know a lot of people want Denver to go in and draft the quarterback. As in the NFL, if your guy is there, then you have to go get him. But I would want to force someone to be the guy. If you don't feel like either of the guys who would be available at 12 are not your guy, then you need to go address some other needs, and that's fine. But yeah, it's like I think this is going to be something to watch as we move forward.
We're going to have, we got 3 months here, really, to 2 months until free agency, 3 months until the draft to really go through this. And we will on, future podcasts too. But just right now, if you look at over the cap's projection, and the cap number hasn't officially been set for next year yet. The Broncos stacked a lot of Randy Gregory's money that they had to account for with him on the cap on this year. And so they're not projected to roll over nearly as much to next year as they have, in past years. And so right now, the short story is over the cap sort of has them projected at about 18 million over the cap next year, with only 44 players under contract. So there's a lot of money that's going to have to move around there. And obviously they get no cap relief if they cut Russell Wilson and take the two, post June 1 and spread his dead cap over 2 years. He would probably count just the same next year as if he's on the roster. So if you take that 18 million over, they have a lot of decisions to make. There's a big group, you got a group of guys that all have cap numbers like in that 12 or 13 million all the way up to 18 to 20 million range that don't have guaranteed money left on their contracts. That's Justin Simmons, Garrett Bowles, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, DJ Jones. You have Jerry Jeudy, who's under contract, 13 million guaranteed. You could trade him. If you come to an agreement on an extension with him, you probably bring the 2024 cap number down from 13 million. They have a lot of ways that they're going to end up shedding money, moving money, pushing money out into the future, whatever. So that there's that they're going to have to make some moves there. And I don't think they're going to go like full Payton era New Orleans and just like kick the can down the road on all that money. Like, I think they're going to make some tough decisions with some of those veteran players, but it's hard to say right now, like take that group, Simmons, Bowles, Sutton, Patrick, DJ Jones, Jerry Jeudy. Like, you wouldn't be surprised if at least one of them was cut, at least one of them was traded, and at least, a couple of them were back. But picking who fits into what category in that would not be an easy task at this point. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And then Ryan, the thing that I've sort of dawned on me over the last few days is like, they don't have guys going to free agency that are like really flashy, top of the roster type guys, but they just have a lot of meat and potatoes going to free agency. Lloyd Cushenberry, Josie Jewell, PJ Locke, Mike Purcell, Adam Troutman, and Chris Manhertz, Michael Burton, Will Lutz, Fabian Moreau. I mean, like, if you were listing the top, 5 to 10 players on the team, you might not put any of those guys on that list. And at the same time, like, they're all starters and they all played a lot. And so like, that's that you don't just like, you can't just say, oh, well, we'll figure that out, because they don't have that kind of depth. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they approach that. I mean, it would make sense to figure out really with any of them, but especially like, PJ, Will Lutz, probably, maybe Troutman. I think Josie too, but like, so you can make the argument really that it makes sense to bring any of those guys back, especially since none of them will break the bank most likely. But you just have a lot of decisions to make on a lot of guys. And all of that's going to happen in the next, 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, I think when you look at the guys that are heading free agency, maybe perhaps to their benefit, they are not guys that are going to break the bank. That's going to demand a big payday. So, and you do need that depth. So yeah, maybe like I'll be all for like bringing someone like PJ Locke back. If you're able to bring back Lloyd Cushenberry, like if you're able to bring some of those guys back, I think that does help. That's not going to be like those are not the type of moves that are going to like turn you from 8-9 to 10-7,
right,
or 11-6. But you don't have a lot of depth, and you need it, and you have to do it in a way where you're not like limit yourself in terms of cap even more. But yeah, when you do look at those guys, I honestly, if I had to pick one, I would like to see someone like PJ Locke come back.
Yeah.
I know they're gonna have Caden Sturrs coming back from injury. They drafted JL Skinner, but PJ Locke I thought played some solid football, taking over for Kareem Jackson, and I think he will really be someone who can really help them in the back end moving forward.
Yep, no doubt. It's one of Ryan, yesterday, I mean, the three guys, the three leaders of the Broncos football operation talked for combined, like, I think an hour basically. And there's so much about George's future and building, and Sean Payton saying, he's not even sure they're building on the foundation yet. They're just putting the friggin' pilings in still, like all this stuff. And yet one of the things that just like caught my attention was George saying that they viewed Alex Forsyth, the rookie 7th rounder, the center from Oregon that they drafted in the spring. They're like, yeah, we view Alex Forsyth as a starter in the league. And I just thought, like, I wonder what Lloyd Cushenberry thinks about that in terms of his prospects of being re-signed. And then there's a difference between saying you think someone's a starter and then saying you think they're a starter right now. And boy, we have our center of the future. He didn't say that, obviously, but like, there's a lot of questions in terms of like, with Josie Jewell, is Drew Sanders going to play inside linebacker in the future, or is he an edge guy? He looked more natural at edge, but he hasn't played inside a lot. With the corner spot opposite Pat Surtain, like, is Riley Moss ready to be a starting cornerback in the NFL as a second-year player? Can, like, JL Skinner or one of those guys, be in a rotation at safety where you'd feel good about Justin, PJ, Caden Stearns, and JL Skinner, sort of like your group? We don't know the answer to that question. Same with a guy like Alex Forsyth. Sean Payton at one point during the season mentioned, sort of like off the cuff, that Forsyth was one of the first guys in the building and spent all this extra time watching film and sort of like developing behind the scenes. And so, like, you're all of those, they know a lot more about the answers or potential answers to all of those questions than we do, obviously, especially because most of their rookies, besides Mims and then, Sanders a little bit and Riley on special teams, like, they didn't play a lot. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that stuff shakes out. You have a decision to make with a guy like Garrett Bowles, but do you have a left tackle on the roster? Not unless you think, Quinn Bailey or Cam Fleming or a young guy like Demontre Jacobs, who was on the practice squad all year. Like, so for all of the sort of all that stuff that got talked about yesterday, there are so many roster decisions, further down the list that are going to really sort of like set the course for what the team looks like in 2024 and beyond. And it's all going to be pretty interesting.
One thing I would like to add to this, like, given all the things you just said and all the roster questions we have, that's why I felt like this was like the timing for the Russ situation was bad. Because at least if you knew Russ was going to your season as your quarterback, and at one point I thought he had a chance to do that, then it's like you can shift your focus to like, all right, what's the future of left tackle is going to look like? Right. Who's going to start alongside Pat Surtain? Is it Riley Moss? If that's the case, then boom, that's that answer. We had that answer, but from what we saw this year, I don't know, because I'm just judging based on what we saw in games.
Right.
And he didn't get a lot of that time to do that. But like George, Sean, they see something different than we do in practice when after they, close the media viewing. But yeah, like that's why I felt like the whole quarterback situation, I think the timing was just bad. Yeah. Like that's how I look at it. Because there's even throughout the year, there were so many things you wondered about the rest of the roster.
Right.
Like, you felt like, all right, if they don't have to worry about the quarterback situation, at least that would help a little bit. Now you have to deal with that and figure out who's starting the quarterback in 2020 and 2024, which that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And to me, like, from the way we got him from Sean Payton since last year, he's not a fan of a rebuild. He's not a fan of tearing it down. But it's hard to like figure out like how, like, just right now, and I'm talking about as of January 10th, We don't know what the roster is going to look like after March. We don't know what the roster is going to look like after NFL draft. But from at this moment, it's hard to imagine like what step forward they're going to take, especially when you don't know who is going to be your quarterback. And it's clearly it doesn't seem like it's going to be Russell Wilson. And from what we saw, like you hope maybe maybe it's a situation where you are able to have like Jarrett Stidham as your guy for this year, and maybe you draft like Michael Penix, Bo Nix, something develop, or bring in someone like a Gardner Minshew and have him and Stidham battle out while trying to develop a young guy. But still, there's still other parts of the roster that, like, you look at, like, man, there's so many questions that need to be answered, and you just made it even harder when you basically told your starting Russell Wilson, "Hey, we need you to take the back seat." So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot this team has to answer. And I feel like the whole quarterback debacle made it even worse.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think like in a perfect world, you would have continued to try to, build a younger and younger roster, get younger and get less expensive with Russell as the quarterback. And then at some point when it's a little bit more financially tolerable, which really, like, if we're being honest, wouldn't have been for 2 more years, then you make the change, obviously, depending on how that was going. And then you've got a nice young nucleus, like to plop a new quarterback into. That's not the way it went, obviously. That's not the way it's going to go. And frankly, like, listen, I don't know if I don't think they handled the negotiations particularly well. Only time will tell if this is the right time to get rid of him or not. I can understand it from the financial standpoint. Like, you're not in a better position if you do this a year from now, and you're putting $86.6 million on the books over 2 years. Like, I get it. If he's not the guy, rip the Band-Aid off and let's do this. But you're right in the sense that, like, the list gets stacked up really high in terms of the hurdles that you're trying to clear and what you're trying to accomplish if you're staying relevant. So to me, like, one of the things as you think through all of the ways that you can handle the quarterback situation and the rest of the roster, every time you start down a path, like, you're in the maze, and every time you start down a path, like, you hit a hedgerow. Like, it's just really hard to chart the course of, like, getting younger, getting cheaper, not mortgaging more of the future, and also getting rid of Russ and also staying competitive. Like, they just don't all, it's like they don't all fit in the boat. One of them doesn't work. So, like, are you going to push more money into the future with other players than you want to keep this group of veteran players together, to try to smooth the quarterback transition? Or are you going to make a really drastic move, like, trade a guy like Pat Surtain so that you can be flush with draft capital, except for now you've given away, the linchpin to your defense? Are you going to, try to get by with Jarrett Stidham and a young guy like JJ McCarthy, maybe learning for a year behind the scenes? Are you really going to compete that way? Like, they've just got themselves in this fix where there's not an easy way out. Like, outside of hitting the Powerball like the 49ers did, where you take a guy in the 7th round and he turns into an MVP candidate, that would work, but that's not likely. Brock Purdy doesn't that doesn't happen every year. It doesn't even happen. It hardly ever happens. So it's not like, and then the other part of it is, well, it's probably just a 2-year process of replenishing your draft capital, making strategic decisions about where to get younger and where to invest in the future. They're gonna give big money at some point to a guy like Pat Surtain, a guy like Quinn Miners. That's good. That's money well spent, probably. But then you have this is Sean Payton, like, 2 years of this sort of like purgatory, 2 more years of this sort of purgatory before you're free and clear and on the rise. Like, that doesn't seem like a great option either. So they've got hard decisions ahead. There's no doubt about it. And there are going to be trade-offs that are not going to be pleasant to try to figure out over this offseason, over the next, year plus. And that's just sort of where they're at this point.
Yeah, the the Broncos are going to have to make some tough decisions, and I think some of them are not going to be pretty. Some are going to be surprising. Some are not going to. Some of the fans are not going to like.
Yeah.
It's probably there's a chance it might be a fan favorite that might have to walk away, or they're going to have to part ways with. And it's just the reality of the situation. Like, they made the first tough decision with the quarterback position, and I feel like there's a lot more to come in order to get to a situation where you're able to get to be able to build this roster the right way. It's a lot of it's going to be a lot of tough decisions starting with this offseason, because that's the reality. That's the reality of this team. And to me, I think you kind of I think you have a point there. It's going to be like a 2-year process. So, you will hope someone like a Pat Surtain could stay long term. You would think, to me, I think that's the most logical thing. But at the same time, they're going to have to look at that and like, all right, are we really that in that bad of a situation where we might have to do it just to get some draft capital? Because even George Payton said himself, they want to keep building. He says building depth starts with the draft.
Yep.
And to me, it's hard to do that when you don't have a lot of draft capital. So that's where it gets to the point where I know some fans say, well, let's see if they can trade up. No, you can't. You just can't trade. You can't keep losing draft capital each time you guys screw something up. There's going to have to get to a point where you're just going to have to you can't just keep doing that. You just can't. And to me, that's where the Broncos are. You can't just keep trying to say, all right, this situation didn't work. All right, what can we trade to for immediate impact? Yeah. I think this is going to be a process, and that's the quicker you have to accept that this is going to be a process, and you hope Sean Payton accepts that, because that's the reality you're in. You're not just going to, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they could wave a magic wand and fix every issue out there. But to me, just looking at what we've seen this year and looking at the situation they're going to the offseason, this is not all right, we're just going to go crazy this offseason. Now we're back into contending for the AFC West. This is going to be it's going to take some work. Yep. It's going to take a lot of work, and they said it yesterday. Sean Payton said they have a ton of work to do, and they really do. And that ton of work is going to come with a lot of difficult decisions. But yeah, it's not a pretty situation. Denver is not in a pretty situation right now.
Nope. We'll be here to chronicle all of it for you. I think that'll wrap it up for this week. We got a ton to talk about. We'll be here regularly through the off season. Obviously, even in the next month, you're talking, college all-star games into the combine and then free agency and the draft. So we'll be here to take you through it, react obviously and analyze all of the moves that get made over the course of this offseason. Thanks for following along during the regular season as well. Obviously, no shortage of interesting stuff to cover. So that'll do it for this week. For Ryan, I'm Parker. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching if you're watching on YouTube. We will talk to you next week.